Some mysteries whisper, others scream. But this one waited. It waited on the side of a rural highway. It waited in an unmarked grave. It waited in the memory of a man who could never forget what he stumbled upon. And it waited in the mind of someone who would not let her stay silent anymore. This is not just a cold case. This is a story that began with a green canvas bundle and ended with a revolution in how the world solves crimes. Welcome to Buried Secret Media. If you love deep dive true crime, suspense, and the untold stories buried under decades of dust, make sure you like, comment, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Because today we're stepping into one of the most haunting unsolved cases of the 20th century, a case the world would come to know by a name no person ever deserved, the Tent Girl. It was the morning of May 17, 1968. The air in Scott County, Kentucky was cool, the kind of morning where sound travels easily. Birds carried their songs across open fields. Cars on U.S. Highway 25 hummed by in the distance. Everything felt slow, quiet, predictable. Wilbur Riddle, a well digger by trade, had driven out along the highway to look for discarded glass insulators from telephone poles. It was a small side hobby he enjoyed. Something to pass the time. Something peaceful. He had no idea that in a few minutes he would find something that would follow him for the rest of his life. Imagine walking alone along a patch of brush off the highway. The grass is knee-high. The trees sway. You're thinking about your job, your lunch, your evening, the normal, everyday things that make the world feel safe. And then you see it. A green canvas bundle. Large, heavy, out of place. Not trash. Not luggage. Something wrong. Something that makes your heartbeat stumble for half a second. But curiosity is powerful. It pulls at you. You step closer. You nudge the bundle with your boot. And suddenly, it rolls. It tumbles down a small embankment and a corner of the canvas loosens. Just enough for the contents to shift. Just enough to reveal a glimpse of what's inside. Wilbur saw the shape. The unmistakable outline of a human form. And in a single instant, the peace of the morning shattered. He froze. His breath caught. And then instinct took over. He ran. Not a walk. Not a cautious retreat. A full-speed sprint to the nearest gas station. To get help. Within minutes, police officers from the Scott County Sheriff's Office arrived and followed Wilbur back to the embankment. What they found would become one of the most enduring mysteries in Kentucky's history. The green canvas was thick, heavy industrial fabric. The kind used for tents. Tightly wrapped with rope. Officers worked carefully. Slowly. They pulled out a knife and sliced into the fabric. And inside there she was. A girl. Young. Small. No clothes. No identification. No belongings. Nothing that could tell them who she was or where she came from. For a moment, the entire search party fell silent. You have to understand, even trained officers are shaken when they come face to face with the unknown. Not just a body, but a mystery. A person without a name. A life without context. A tragedy without answers. The sheriff who responded that day would later say the discovery got under his skin, the kind of case that haunts you long after you hang up your uniform. And right there, in the still air of a Kentucky morning, she was nameless. But the world would soon give her a name anyway. The Tent Girl. Once the shock settled, investigators did what they were trained to do. Document, observe, and collect anything that might tell them the story hidden inside that canvas. The first observations were simple. The girl was small, roughly 5 feet 1 inch. She was slender, about 110 to 115 pounds. Her hair was reddish-brown. Based on her appearance, she might have been in her mid-teens to late teens, possibly between 16 and 19 years old. She had been deceased for several weeks. But those were only the surface-level clues. What truly confused investigators were the small details. A scrap of white cloth, thin, soft, clung to her shoulder. It looked like part of a baby's diaper or maybe a towel. Why was it there? Was it something she was using? Something that belonged to someone else? Something that tied her to a child? Then there was the canvas itself. It wasn't from a household tent. It wasn't something you'd find on a camping trip. It looked industrial, like something used around carnivals, fairs, construction sites, or traveling shows. And the rope, thick, clean, purposeful. One detail chilled investigators the most. Her right hand was clenched. Her fingernails were broken. That suggested something terrible. She may have been alive when she was placed inside the canvas. Alive, and trying to escape. The investigators believed she struggled. They believed she tried to free herself. They believed she fought with everything she had. But the full truth of her final moments was something only she knew. In 1968, solving a case like this was far more complicated than today. There were no digital databases, no instant nationwide searches, no DNA testing, no internet, no fingerprints on file unless someone had been printed previously. The police had two things: a drawing and a description. That was it. Reporters picked up the story immediately. A sketch artist created a portrait of the unknown girl, carefully including a small gap between her two upper front teeth, a feature the Examiner noticed. The newspapers published the sketch under a headline that would stick in the public consciousness. Who is Tent Girl? Radio stations broadcast the description. Posters went up. Nearby states were contacted. Families with missing daughters compared the sketch to the faces of the girls they longed to see again. But every lead collapsed. A girl named Debbie, believed missing, turned out to be alive and living in Pennsylvania. Another girl found in Pennsylvania, eerily also inside a canvas sack, had no connection to the Tent Girl at all. Every hope slowly fizzled. Every promising tip ended in disappointment. Weeks turned to months. Months turned to years. And eventually, the case went cold. By 1971, 3 years after the discovery, the decision was made to bury the unknown girl. She was laid to rest in Georgetown Cemetery. A local company donated a headstone. It was simple, respectful, and heartbreaking. Tent Girl, found May 17, 1968. Age about 16 to 19 years. Unidentified. Her gravestone bore a carved image of the sketch, a silent plea for anyone who might someday recognize her face. And then, silence. For decades. But this story doesn't end with silence. Because somewhere, a young man would hear her story and refuse to let it stay buried. Someone who would change the entire course of this cold case. Someone who wasn't a detective, wasn't a police officer, wasn't even alive when she died. A teenager. And his name was Todd Matthews. Some mysteries wait for the right detective. Others wait for the right moment. But this mystery? This one waited for the right person. Someone who wasn't part of law enforcement, someone who had no badge, no training, and no reason to get involved. Except he couldn't stop thinking about her. This is where our story shifts. Because while investigators had long moved on, while files collected dust, and while the Tent Girl's grave sat in silence, someone new was about to pick up the case. And once he did, he would not let go for the next 10 years. It was October of 1987, nearly 20 years after the Tent Girl was found, when a 17-year-old kid named Todd Matthews heard her name for the first time. Todd lived in Livingston, Tennessee. A small town. Quiet, rural, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. He was dating a girl named Lori Riddle. And one evening, close to Halloween, they were sitting together trading ghost stories, urban legends, and spooky moments from their childhoods. These were supposed to be fun, harmless stories. But Lori had something different. She said, "My dad found a dead body once." Todd laughed at first. But Lori wasn't joking. Her father, Wilbur Riddle, the very same man who had found the green canvas bundle, had told the story many times. The discovery had never left him. He had clipped newspaper articles. He had saved the Master Detective magazine story about Tent Girl. Lori's voice softened. She said her father always felt bad that no one knew the girl's name. And in that moment, that single quiet moment, something inside Todd shifted. Some people hear a sad story and feel sympathy. Others feel curiosity. But Todd felt something deeper, an obligation. As if her story had been handed to him personally. He said later. It was fascination. Instant fascination. And it wasn't the gruesomeness of the case. It wasn't the mystery. It was the injustice. A girl had been found. But no one knew who she was. Her family, whoever they were, had never been told what happened to her. And Todd Matthews, 17 years old, felt that he needed to fix that. He didn't know it yet, but he had just stepped into one of the longest, most obsessive journeys of his life. Most teenagers spend their nights thinking about school, dating, sports, music, future dreams. Todd spent his nights thinking about a dead girl. A girl in a green canvas tent. A girl whose grave said unidentified. He asked Lori if her father still had the old magazine article. He did. Todd visited Wilbur Riddle, and the two sat together as Wilbur recounted the discovery from 1968. Wilbur showed him the magazine with the Tent Girl sketch. Showed him the cemetery where she was buried. And Todd walked away from that meeting with a single feeling. He could not leave this alone. The Tent Girl wasn't just another case. She wasn't just a Jane Doe. She was a real person. And someone somewhere was missing her. Todd could not shake that thought. It crawled into his chest and stayed there. He imagined her family, the mother wondering why her phone never rang, the the sister checking the mail for a letter, the father waiting for a call that never came. He imagined the life she must have lived. Someone remembered her laughter. Someone remembered her voice. Someone knew her name. And yet the world had buried her without it. Todd felt like she was abandoned twice. First by whoever killed her. And then by the world that forgot to find her name. That, he decided, was unacceptable. Todd had no badge. No training. No access to police databases. No authority to interview witnesses. He was 17. Just a kid. But what he did have was time, patience, and a fire in his chest that refused to die. He began by gathering every scrap of information he could find. Old newspaper clippings, phone calls to the sheriff's office, public records from the county, conversations with anyone who remembered the story from the 60s. He wrote notes. He built timelines. He created lists of missing women in nearby states. He studied every detail on Tent Girl's gravestone. Height, hair color, approximate age, estimated time of death, the carving of her face, the location she was found. But one detail bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. The scrap of white cloth. It looked like a baby's diaper. Why would an older teenage girl have a baby's diaper cloth on her shoulder? Did she have a child? Was she caring for someone's child? Was she on the run with a baby? Or could she have been older than investigators estimated? This single clue stayed in Todd's mind, like a loose thread he knew he needed to pull. And when he did, it would unravel the entire case. But that moment was still years away. The 1980s and early 1990s were nothing like today's world. If you wanted to find someone, you had to write letters, make long-distance phone calls, request physical documents, visit libraries, travel to courthouses. Police departments didn't share information across state lines. There were no national databases for missing persons, no online communities, no centralized computer systems. As Todd later said, Chicago didn't know what Detroit was doing. Kentucky didn't know what Tennessee was doing. Nobody shared anything. It was like trying to solve a puzzle when half the pieces were in another room, and no one would bring them to you. But Todd didn't quit. Night after night, he sat at his small desk, papers spread everywhere, studying, comparing, scribbling notes, pushing deeper into a rabbit hole that no one else was willing to enter. This is where obsession begins to blur with purpose. Lori, his girlfriend, later his wife, sometimes worried. She saw him stay awake all night reading, searching, thinking about a girl who had been dead for 2 decades. She once said, "You spend more time with a dead girl than you do with me." Todd didn't deny it. He couldn't. Because in his mind, the tent girl deserved someone who wouldn't give up on her. And Todd Matthews was that someone. Then came 1992. A year that would change everything. Todd watched a news segment featuring Senator Al Gore talking about something new, an information superhighway. The internet. Back then, hardly anyone had a home computer. And the internet was a confusing, slow, screeching dial-up system that tied up your phone line. But Todd saw something no one else did. A way to find the tent girl's name. Think about it. For the first time in history, people from different states could connect. Missing persons reports could be shared digitally. Families could post about their missing loved ones. Old files could be uploaded. Clues could cross state lines instantly. Todd worked extra hours. Saved money. Bought a second-hand computer. He spent nights learning how to use message boards, bulletin boards, early websites, genealogy forums, missing persons pages, anything where people were looking for lost loved ones. And in 1997, he made a decision that would set everything in motion. He created a website dedicated entirely to the tent girl. It was simple. A single page. A sketch. Her description. Where she was found. A plea for information. This website, tiny and humble, was the first digital memorial she ever had. It was also the spark that would unlock the truth. Todd's late-night routine became a ritual. The house was quiet. Everyone asleep. He would sit at the computer, the soft glow on his face, scrolling through lists of missing women, one after another. He checked physical descriptions, ages, hair color, height, locations, dates. He checked missing persons from Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, anywhere near or far. And every night he hit wall after wall. But Todd didn't stop. He once estimated he read about 400 missing person descriptions before he found anything that made his heart stop. And that moment finally came. But not during the day. Not during work hours. Not when he was alert. It came one night when his eyes were so tired he could barely read the screen. When he was seconds away from giving up for the night. That's when he saw it. A simple listing. A short message. 3 words that froze him in place. Lexington, 1967, missing. His breath hitched. His heart started racing. He clicked. And the world shifted around him. This was it. The post that would connect everything. It was late. The kind of late where even the night feels tired. Where the house creaks softly, and the hum of an old computer is the only sound keeping you company. Todd Matthews was exhausted. He'd spent hours scrolling through missing persons posts. 400 descriptions. 400 families. 400 stories that didn't match the one girl he couldn't stop thinking about. His eyes burned. His head throbbed. He was ready to shut everything down. And then he saw it. A small, unassuming post on a message board website. Someone asking about a woman who vanished decades ago. 3 words leapt off the screen. Lexington, 1967, missing. Lexington. The city just 15 miles from where the tent girl's body was found. The year before tent girl was discovered. Todd clicked the message. And in that instant everything changed. The message had been posted by a woman named Rosemary Westbrook from Arkansas. It read something close to, "My sister Barbara has been missing since late 1967. She had brown hair, brown eyes, was about 5 feet 2 inches tall, and was last seen in the Lexington, Kentucky area. Please contact me if you know anything." Todd stopped breathing. Brown hair. Petite. Lexington. 1967. His sister searching. A girl who disappeared without a trace. Every description was a mirror image of the tent girl. But there was something else, a detail that struck him harder than all the others. Barbara had a baby daughter. And just like that, the scrap of white cloth found on tent girl's shoulder, the one investigators said resembled a baby's diaper, lit up in Todd's mind like a flare. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a connection. A thread. A match. The kind of moment investigators dream of. The kind of moment that makes your hands tremble. Without hesitating, Todd wrote to Rosemary. He was careful, respectful, explaining that he had been researching an unidentified woman found in Kentucky decades earlier. He gave just enough information to see if she recognized any of it. Rosemary responded. And soon the two were talking not like strangers, but like two people who had been holding the same missing piece of a puzzle for far too long. She told him about her sister, Barbara Anne Hackman, born in Illinois. A warm smile, a small frame, long brown hair. A mother. A wife. She had married a man named George Earl Taylor, a carnival worker who traveled from town to town. Barbara had been seen in the Lexington area in late 1967. And then one day, she was gone. Her husband claimed she had simply run off. Abandoned her baby. Abandoned her life. But to her sisters and parents, that story never felt right. They felt something terrible had happened. But Barbara never reached out again. She never came home. And without modern technology, her family had no way of connecting her disappearance to a Jane Doe in Kentucky. Until now. Todd listened to Rosemary describe her sister, and each word made his chest tighten. The physical description matched. The timeline matched. The location matched. The detail about the baby matched. Everything aligned. And Todd Matthews, a man who had spent nearly 10 years searching for a name, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Oh. Todd knew what he had to do next. He had to convince law enforcement and the Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office to exhume the tent girl's remains and test the DNA. But there were problems. Todd wasn't an officer. He wasn't a forensic expert. He wasn't anyone who had power in the world of criminal investigations. He knew that making this request as a regular person would raise eyebrows everywhere. And at first it did. Some officials dismissed him. Others gave polite but vague responses. A few seemed confused why a civilian was so invested in a decades-old Jane Doe case. But Todd didn't back down. Not now. Not with a potential name in his hands. He wrote letters. He made phone calls. He contacted anyone willing to listen. He was persistent, not pushy, not reckless, but determined in a way investigators respected once they understood his motives. This wasn't sensationalism. This wasn't morbid curiosity. This was a man honoring a promise he made to a girl he never knew. And eventually, someone listened. A forensic anthropologist with the Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office named Dr. Emily Craig took interest in the case. She reviewed Todd's findings. She listened to his reasoning. She studied the original autopsy and the physical remains. And she agreed. This might be worth a closer look. It was enough to set a plan into motion. March 2, 1998. Nearly 30 years after the tent girl was buried, officials from the medical examiner's office, local law enforcement, and forensic specialists gathered at Georgetown Cemetery. The air was cool again, uncannily similar to the morning she had been found. The old gravestone stood quietly, the carved face looking out over rows of markers. And then, the ground was opened. Slowly, carefully, respectfully. This was not a crime scene exhumation of a suspect. This was the reopening of someone's story. Inside the casket, forensic teams recovered small bone and tooth samples, material that could finally give Tent Girl a voice. These samples were sent to a state lab in Frankfort, Kentucky. Meanwhile, Rosemary Westbrook provided a cheek swab for comparison. And then, they waited. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Then 3. Everyone involved, Todd, Rosemary, the detectives, the anthropologist, held their breath. Decades of silence now resting on a few strands of DNA. Finally, in early April 1998, the phone call came. The Kentucky State Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the match. The DNA was a perfect genetic link between the Tent Girl and Rosemary Westbrook's sister. The unknown woman buried in Georgetown Cemetery was Barbara Anne Hackman Taylor. After 30 years of mystery, the Tent Girl finally had her name back. Imagine being Rosemary. Imagine waiting from 1967 to 1998 to finally know what happened to your sister. Imagine the relief. Imagine the heartbreak. Imagine the weight lifting, and the grief returning all at once. Barbara's family cried. They prayed. They thanked Todd. They thanked law enforcement. They thanked the forensic scientists. And they thanked fate that a teenager heard a story and decided not to ignore it. For the first time they knew where Barbara was. They could visit her grave. They could honor her properly. They could grieve with the truth in their hands. And the world, the true crime world, the investigative world, saw something bigger. A cold case solved by the internet before the world even understood how powerful the internet could be. With the identification confirmed, a clearer picture of Barbara Anne Hackman's life began to emerge. She was born on September 12, 1943. She grew up in Illinois, a small-town girl with a bright smile. Soft-spoken, petite, friendly, hard-working. In her early 20s, she met a man named George Earl Taylor. He was older. He worked in traveling carnivals, setting up tents, moving from city to city, living a life that shifted constantly. Barbara married him. They had a baby girl together. Barbara also became stepmother to his older daughter. In late 1967, they were living in the Lexington, Kentucky area. Barbara worked at a restaurant. She was taking care of her child. She had dreams, plans, and responsibilities. And then one day she was gone. By the spring of 1998, the world finally knew her name. Barbara Anne Hackman Taylor. A daughter. A sister. A mother. A woman who had vanished in the last months of 1967 and remained nameless for 3 long decades. But now that the Tent Girl had her identity back, a new question rose to the surface. Who killed her? Because identifying Barbara was only the beginning. The real mystery, the one buried beneath years of silence, lies, and unanswered questions, was about to unfold. Investigators began where all investigations begin. With the last person known to have seen the victim alive. For Barbara Anne Hackman, that person was her husband. George Earl Taylor, a man with a transient lifestyle, a temper that some described as unpredictable, and a job that revolved around canvas tents, ropes, and constant travel. The coincidences were no longer coincidences. Barbara was married to a carnival worker. Carnival workers used heavy tent canvas, the same type Tent Girl was found in. They also used strong nylon rope, just like the rope around her body. George never reported Barbara missing. He claimed she ran away with another man. She left behind her 8-month-old daughter, something her family insisted she would never have done voluntarily. Red flags weren't subtle. They flashed brightly. Even Barbara's family all those years ago felt George's story didn't make sense. But they had no evidence. No access to Kentucky police. No DNA technology. Nothing that could have connected Barbara to the Tent Girl. Not until Todd Matthews found Rosemary's message. Once Barbara's identity was confirmed, investigators reopened the case on a deeper level. They mapped out George's movements in late 1967. They found troubling patterns. Travel records from the carnival. Neighbors' statements. Employment logs. Old police notes. Family testimonies. Anything that could build a timeline. And again, investigators circled back to the same conclusion. George's story didn't hold up. He claimed Barbara left him voluntarily. But he never made a missing persons report. Not in Kentucky, not in Illinois, not anywhere. He continued traveling with the carnival without looking for her. And when asked by his own daughter where Barbara went, he simply said, She ran off. No explanation. No worry. No search. To law enforcement, that was suspicious at best and damning at worst. To understand Barbara's final days, investigators pieced together the dynamics of her marriage. Family members later reported troubling signs. Barbara seemed unhappy. She sometimes confided in siblings about concerns regarding her marriage. After her disappearance, George gave evasive answers. He avoided discussion. When his own daughter asked where her stepmother went, he gave a vague, emotionless reply. Remember, this was the 1960s. Domestic violence was rarely discussed publicly. Women had limited support to leave abusive partners. Families often lived far apart and had few ways to keep track of each other. Barbara's disappearance was quietly absorbed by time. Her family believed she might have moved away, changed states, or simply become unreachable. Meanwhile, her body was lying in an unmarked grave in Kentucky, waiting for someone to notice the connection. Now, here is the part that transforms this from a cold case into a case that feels painfully close to closure. When investigators in 1998 named George Taylor as their primary suspect, there was nothing they could do next. Because George had died 11 years earlier, in October of 1987. No interviews. No interrogation. No confession. No trial. The man most likely responsible was gone. For Barbara's family, this was bittersweet. They finally had answers. They finally had Barbara's name back. But justice, the kind that happens in a courtroom, would never come. Still, as one investigator put it, even without a conviction, the truth matters. And the truth points toward George. With George gone, the only clues left were forensic results and the partial timeline investigators could reconstruct. Sometime in late 1967, perhaps during an argument or a moment of violence or a situation that escalated suddenly, Barbara was harmed. Her injuries were consistent with a blow to the head. Investigators could not determine the precise cause of death due to the condition of the remains. She was wrapped in a heavy green canvas, the same material used for carnival tents. She was tied with rope. The scrap of diaper cloth on her body suggested she had been caring for her infant daughter shortly before she died. And the broken nails on her hand indicated struggle. Investigators believe Barbara was alive when she was placed inside the canvas bundle. They believe she tried to escape. They believe she fought for her life. And they believe that whoever wrapped her, left her there to die. Everything, the canvas, the rope, the timing, the proximity to Lexington, the motive, the lack of concern and the false story about her running away, pointed back to George. It's a tragic conclusion, but it is the one supported by every available clue. After 30 years of uncertainty, Barbara's siblings were able to visit her grave. They could stand before the headstone and know exactly who rested beneath it. They even chose to update her grave marker. The new one included her real name, Barbara Anne Hackman, not Taylor. Because the family wanted to honor the name she was born with, not the name of the man they believed took her life. They left flowers. They prayed. They cried. They thanked Todd Matthews, the man who refused to let Tent Girl remain a Jane Doe. As Rosemary once said, it took a long time, but now we can finally exhale. By the late 1990s, the Tent Girl case gained national attention once again. Not because of the mystery, not because of the tragedy, but because of how it was solved. A teenager had done what investigators couldn't. A man with no badge, no authority, and no reason to get involved gave a name back to a forgotten woman. His persistence inspired cold case units across the country. It showed the power of the early internet. It opened the door to new methods of solving old mysteries. Todd Matthews would later help create the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS, a groundbreaking online tool for connecting missing persons with unidentified remains. A system that has since helped solve countless cases. And it all began with a girl found in a tent, and a young man who cared too much to stop looking. This is the legacy of the Tent Girl. Not just a tragedy, but a turning point. Her story helped change the way America handles cold cases. Her identity gave hope to families of missing loved ones. Her name, once lost, now stands as a symbol of perseverance. By the late 1990s, the Tent Girl case had become more than a mystery, more than a cold case. More than a headline from another era. It became a symbol. A reminder that a single forgotten story can still find its way back into the light, when the right person refuses to let it die. But while Barbara's identity had finally been restored, there were still layers of her story the world had never heard. Layers that reveal who she truly was, what life she lived, and how she vanished so completely that it took 3 decades and a digital revolution to find her. Because the truth is this. If the world had understood Barbara Anne Hackman better, she might never have been forgotten in the first place. And if the world had understood her marriage, her circumstances, and the era she lived in, her disappearance might have been taken seriously. So now we go deeper. Because identifying Barbara solved the mystery of who she was. But the mystery of why her life ended, how she slipped through the cracks, and what really happened in those final weeks was still waiting to be uncovered. To understand the Tank Girl, you must first understand the girl herself. Barbara Anne Hackman was born on September 12, 1943 in Illinois. She was one of several siblings, a close-knit family, the kind where sisters shared secrets, where laughter came easily and where family ties were strong. As a child, Barbara was described as polite and shy. She was the kind of girl who didn't like conflict, who tried to please everyone, who found joy in small things. But like many young women in the 1960s, Barbara wanted her independence. She wanted adventure. She wanted to see what life outside her hometown looked like. She was soft-spoken, yes, but not fragile. She had ambition. She had dreams. She wanted something more. And that desire for more may have been the very thing that led her into the orbit of George Earl Taylor. George was a carnival worker, a job that paints its own picture. Travel, tents, long nights, temporary communities, a life that moves every few days. A world that lives on the edge of society, not dangerous by default but unpredictable. Carnival crews often relied on each other. They lived together, worked together, ate together, slept in bunks or trailers, and they stayed constantly on the move. This lifestyle attracted people seeking escape. Escape from routine, from home, from family constraints, from a life they didn't want anymore. For a young woman like Barbara, marrying a man who worked the carnival might have seemed exciting. A break from the expected path. A chance to see the world outside her hometown. But carnival life was not glamorous. It was unstable. It demanded constant adjustment. And it offered little protection for women in unhealthy relationships. Barbara became a wife, a stepmother, then a mother. All while navigating a lifestyle that changed from week to week. Her family would later recall moments of concern, concerns that at the time seemed vague, but in hindsight became warnings they wished they had recognized sooner. By late 1967, Barbara and George were living in the Lexington, Kentucky area. Their relationship was strained. Money was tight. Travel was constant. Barbara was juggling the demands of caring for an infant while trying to work enough hours to keep the household afloat. Her family, living in Illinois, had limited insight into her daily life. Phone calls were rare in those days. Letters slowed down. Distance created silence. And in abusive or controlling relationships, distance can become a trap. Barbara's siblings later said they felt something was wrong in her final months. But they never imagined the truth. Because they didn't know what we know now. They didn't know that Barbara was most likely trying to leave. They didn't know she may have been planning a way out. They didn't know that arguments with George were becoming more frequent. And they didn't know that her dream of independence had slowly turned into a life she needed to escape. Investigators believe that in late 1967, something happened inside that small domestic world. Something that escalated past the point of safety. The only two people who truly knew what happened were George and Barbara. And only one of them survived. One of the most heartbreaking parts of Barbara's story is how completely she disappeared without anyone questioning it. But this was 1967. There were no national databases. No Amber Alerts. No missing persons unit like the ones we know today. No internet. No social media. No automatic alerts. If a person vanished 6 states away, their family might never know. Especially if the spouse, the one person expected to report them missing, claimed they voluntarily left. And that's exactly what George did. He told people Barbara ran away with another man. He told his daughter that Barbara just left. He never filed a missing persons report. He never contacted her family to check on her. He never searched. He never asked for help. He just moved on. And in the 1960s, that explanation was horrifyingly easy to accept. Women were often dismissed as runaways. If a woman left her home, people assumed she had a reason, even if she didn't. Domestic violence was rarely discussed openly. Women had limited legal protections. And families didn't question husbands the way they would today. Barbara didn't disappear into the night. She disappeared into a world ill-equipped to notice she was gone. Eventually, one of Barbara's sisters filed a missing persons report in another state, Florida, because they believed Barbara might have moved there based on what George told them. This was their only lead. Their only idea. They didn't know she was in Kentucky. They didn't know she had lived near Lexington. They didn't know her body was found off Highway 25. And remember, police departments didn't share information back then. Florida never contacted Kentucky. Kentucky never contacted Illinois. Nobody knew the tent girl's description matched anything. Her case slipped into a bureaucratic abyss, where dozens of unconnected files sat quietly in separate offices across the country. Had the internet existed, had DNA existed, had national databases existed, Barbara's identity would have been found within days. But in 1967, her disappearance simply faded. With Barbara now identified, investigators went back to the forensic details that had confused them for decades. They re-examined the evidence, not to solve the identification, but to understand her final moments. Barbara showed signs of a head injury, being restrained in canvas, being tied with rope, attempting to struggle free, being conscious during part of the process, being placed in a confined space. Her remains were too decomposed to determine all the specifics, but experts believed she did not die accidentally. And nothing about the scene suggested a stranger. The canvas? Carnival grade. The rope? Carnival grade. The timeline? Matched exactly to the period Barbara disappeared under George's story. The distance? Barbara lived minutes from where the tent girl was found. Everything pointed inward, not outward. This was not a case of random violence. This was not the work of a serial killer. This was not the work of a stranger pulling off the highway. Everything about Barbara's death told investigators the same thing. This was personal. At this point in our story, the truth is no longer hiding. The pieces are connecting themselves. The picture is becoming clear. Barbara Anne Hackman Taylor did not disappear into thin air. She was never a runaway. She was never a woman who left with another man, like her husband claimed. She was a victim, a young mother trapped in a difficult marriage, living in a world where women's voices were often ignored, and where missing persons could vanish without anyone noticing. But while investigators now saw the truth, and while Barbara's identity was finally known, a new set of questions emerged, questions that would shape the legacy of this case forever. Because identifying Barbara was one miracle. But understanding how she was identified and why her story changed the investigative world is an entirely different part of this mystery. And now that part begins. There is a reason the tent girl story became famous. A reason it's still discussed today. A reason cold case experts reference it as a turning point in American investigative history. It wasn't because of the tragedy. It wasn't because of the crime. It wasn't even because of the mystery. It was because of who solved it. Not a detective. Not a forensic scientist. Not a police chief. A regular person. A teenager who became an adult still carrying the weight of a girl he had never met. Todd Matthews. He changed everything. Not because he had special training, but because he had something just as powerful. Obsession, compassion, and a refusal to quit. Todd did what no investigator in the 60s or 70s could do. He used the early internet to bridge gaps between missing persons and unidentified remains. He saw connections that no one else had the tools to see. He created one of the first online cold case databases before such a thing even existed. His website, dedicated solely to tent girl, sparked conversations between strangers who might otherwise never have communicated. It was this website, this single page created by a man on a second-hand computer, that ultimately led to Rosemary Westbrook finding him and sharing the clues that matched her missing sister to the unknown Jane Doe in Georgetown. Think about that. A teenager sitting in front of a flickering monitor with dial-up internet and no formal authority, managed to do what professional agencies couldn't accomplish in 30 years. This wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was a man who cared enough to spend night after night searching for someone the world forgot. And when the truth finally emerged, it changed the landscape of cold case investigations forever. To understand how radical Todd's achievement was, you need to understand the world before the internet. In the 1960s and 70s, police departments didn't share case files. Missing persons weren't tracked nationally. Jane Doe cases stayed local. Families had no way to communicate across state lines. Investigators relied on newspapers, phone calls, and handwritten reports. If a missing woman vanished in Illinois, and an unidentified body surfaced in Kentucky, the chances of connecting the two were almost zero. Barbara's case was the perfect example of this failure. Her family filed a missing persons report in a completely different state because George had misled them. Kentucky authorities never saw that report. Illinois authorities never saw the Kentucky Jane Doe file. Florida never contacted Kentucky. Kentucky never contacted Illinois, and so on. These were disconnected worlds, disconnected systems, and the victims fell through the cracks. But by 1997 and 1998, the internet had begun to bridge those gaps. Genealogy forums, early missing persons websites, bulletin board systems, email chains, online communities. For the first time in history, families of missing persons could reach across states instantly. And Todd Matthews seized that opportunity. He became one of the first true online sleuths, decades before the term became mainstream. Some call him the father of online cold case solving. Others call him a pioneer. But he never cared about fame. He cared about Barbara. Todd's work did more than solve a single cold case. It revealed a massive flaw in how America handled missing persons and unidentified remains. Todd's passion and public advocacy caught the attention of national agencies. His insight, that unidentified remains and missing persons must be matched in a searchable national database, became the foundation for something historic. NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Todd went on to help develop it and later worked for the agency itself. NAMUS became the first ever free, publicly accessible, government-run system that allowed families, law enforcement, forensic teams, coroners, investigators, citizens, to compare missing persons with unidentified remains across the entire country. It was groundbreaking, changed everything. It has since solved hundreds of cold cases, and helped families find answers that would have been impossible before Tent Girl. Barbara's story didn't just return her name. It changed the system. It made sure fewer families would live in the dark. It proved that one person with passion can shift the world in ways they never expected. If Todd hadn't taken Lori Riddle's story seriously, NAMUS might never have existed. Barbara's family would still be searching. And Tent Girl would still be a Jane Doe. This is why her story matters. This is why true crime stories matter. This is why persistence matters. Because sometimes justice isn't a courtroom verdict. Sometimes justice is a name. After Barbara was identified in 1998, her family made a decision. They traveled to Kentucky to meet her for the first time in 30 years. Imagine that moment. Imagine standing at a grave marked with a face drawn from a sketch, knowing the person beneath it is your sister. Imagine laying flowers on the resting place of someone you once shared a childhood with, someone you laughed with, ate meals with, celebrated holidays with, someone you searched for decades, someone you thought had vanished forever. And now you finally know where she is. When Barbara's siblings stood at her grave, they made another decision, one symbolic and deeply personal. They updated the headstone to include her real name, Barbara Anne Hackman. Not Taylor. Not the name of the man who likely harmed her. Not the name tied to her final suffering. But the name she was born with. The name her family remembered. The name she deserved. The updated headstone included her full birth name, her birth year, the year of her disappearance, the nickname Tent Girl, a tribute identifying her as a beloved daughter and sister. Barbara finally had the dignity she was denied in death, and her family finally had a place to speak her name. Throughout the decades, one person had never forgotten Barbara. Wilbur Riddle, the man who discovered the green canvas bundle on Highway 25 in 1968. Wilbur kept the original magazine articles. He retold the story dozens of times. He never allowed the mystery to fade from his memory. When he learned that the Tent Girl had finally been identified, he cried. He said he always hoped that one day someone would give her a name. And when Todd Matthews, who later married Wilbur's daughter, solved the case using the internet, Wilbur said, "I'm glad she finally got to go home. Because for 30 years neither Wilbur nor the world knew who she was. Now they did." With Barbara's identity confirmed, and with George Taylor deceased, investigators faced a final question. Should the case be reopened? They reviewed all available evidence. They consulted forensic experts. They tracked down remaining witnesses. They studied Barbara's timeline one last time. And ultimately, the case was closed as a solved identification, but unsolved homicide due to the primary suspect's death. In practical terms, that meant there would be no trial, no arrest, no official charge, no legal verdict. But for Barbara's family, the truth was enough. They believed George harmed her. Investigators believed George harmed her. Todd believed George harmed her. And even without a courtroom, Barbara's story received the most important truth of all. Her name, her life, her identity, her place in history. For 3 decades, the world knew her as the Tent Girl. A Jane Doe who seemed destined to remain a shadow. A mystery wrapped in canvas. A story frozen in time. But now that her identity had been restored, and the suspected killer long gone, the question became, what happens after the truth? How does a family rebuild a narrative shattered for 30 years? How does a community reinterpret a legend they thought they already knew? And how does one case, a single case, end up transforming an entire country's approach to missing persons? To answer those questions, we must now step into the final layers of this story, the legacy, the aftermath, and the ripples that continued spreading long after Barbara Anne Hackman Taylor's name was engraved on her new headstone. Because Barbara's story did not end in 1968. It didn't end in 1998. It didn't end when the case was officially closed. Her story continues in every cold case database, every family still searching, and every investigator who learned that no case is ever truly dead as long as someone still cares enough to keep asking questions. Once the world learned that the 10th girl had been identified, media outlets across the country revisited the case. Newspapers ran front-page stories. Television networks filmed interviews. True crime magazines returned to the cold case they once highlighted decades earlier. Everyone wanted to know, how did a man using the early internet do what police couldn't do in 30 years? And the answer was both simple and powerful. He cared. Todd wasn't motivated by glory. He didn't gain money. He didn't seek fame. He didn't chase headlines. He chased a name. He chased justice. He chased a promise he made to himself the moment he heard the story of the 10th girl. And when the world realized that a teenager with a second-hand computer could solve a cold case older than he was, it forced investigators, forensic experts, and lawmakers to confront an uncomfortable truth. The system was broken. Deeply broken. Because if the system had worked, if missing persons reports had been connected between states, if unidentified remains had been cross-compared against families' reports, if someone had listened sooner, Barbara would not have waited 30 years for her name. The media coverage surrounding the case became a catalyst for change. Suddenly, the 10th girl wasn't just a victim. She was a symbol of everything that needed to be fixed. One of the most emotional parts of the case was the existence of Barbara's infant daughter, the little girl she left behind in 1967. Her daughter grew up not knowing what happened to her mother. She was raised by relatives, missing the chance to know the woman who carried her, the woman who loved her, the woman who probably fought to protect her until her final moment. Out of respect for privacy, the daughter's identity is rarely discussed publicly. But we know this. When she learned the truth, that her mother had not abandoned her, that she had not walked away, that she had been taken from her, changed everything. Imagine growing up believing your mother chose to leave. Imagine learning 3 decades later that she didn't leave at all, she was stolen from you. For Barbara's daughter, the discovery was both healing and heartbreaking. It brought closure and grief, peace and pain. But above all, it brought truth. The truth that her mother had never chosen to disappear. The truth that she had been loved. The truth that she had been wanted. The truth that she had been a victim, not a runaway. Barbara's identity gave her daughter the one gift she had been denied for a lifetime. Answers. In Kentucky, the 10th girl had become a quiet legend, a ghost story whispered over campfires, a local mystery teenagers grew up hearing about, a symbol of unanswered questions. When the truth finally emerged, the community reacted with overwhelming emotion. Visitors came to her gravesite. People who had never known her left flowers, cards, notes, apologies. Some apologized for not solving the case sooner. Some apologized for thinking she was a runaway. Some apologized for letting 30 years pass before her true story came to light. The officials who had investigated her death in 1968 expressed relief and heartbreak. Relief that she had a name. Heartbreak that they had retired without ever finding it themselves. One former sheriff said, "This case stayed with me for years. I always hoped someone would come forward. I never imagined it would take the internet to finish what we started." You might think solving a 30-year-old cold case would bring Todd nothing but joy. But it wasn't that simple. Once Barbara was identified, Todd found himself overwhelmed by emotion, relief, exhaustion, and a strange sense of grief. Because for 10 years, the 10th girl had been a mystery he carried on his shoulders. She had occupied his thoughts. She had kept him awake at night. She had fueled his determination. He had studied every detail of her case so many times that she felt almost like a part of his life despite never having known her. And now the mystery was gone. Her identity was known. Her family had closure. His mission was complete. Todd later admitted he felt empty for a while, as if he'd lost something. As if letting go of the search meant letting go of a piece of himself. But eventually, he found peace in knowing that the obsession that once consumed him had turned into something meaningful. Something bigger than himself. Something that changed the lives of countless families. Because solving the 10th girl case was not the end of Todd's journey. It was only the beginning. After the tent girl case was solved, Todd was approached by law enforcement agencies, coroners, missing persons organizations, and families with cold cases of their own. People wanted him to help. They wanted his insight. They wanted his ability to connect dots others couldn't see. He began working with families who had been waiting for answers longer than they could remember. He helped connect their missing loved ones to databases, to police departments, to coroners, to forensic experts. Over time, Todd became one of the most influential advocates for missing persons reform in the country. His message was simple. No case should ever be forgotten. And he dedicated years of his life to ensuring that no other family would spend 3 decades waiting for answers that could have been found sooner. His advocacy would eventually play a role in shaping NamUs, the national system that now connects missing persons with unidentified remains across all 50 states. What once began as a single obsession became a nationwide movement because one man believed one girl deserved her name back. Barbara's story inspired policymakers, journalists, true crime communities, families with missing loved ones, amateur sleuths, law enforcement agencies, digital investigators. It became a blueprint for how cold cases could be solved in the digital age. And it taught the world one powerful lesson. Sometimes the missing aren't missing. Sometimes they're right where they've always been, but their names have been misplaced by time, distance, and silence. The tent girl case became proof that no mystery is too old to find new answers. After Todd's success, online sleuthing communities began to grow. Forums, message boards, cold case groups, genealogy networks, digital investigation platforms. People from every background, teachers, grandparents, students, retirees, veterans, began contributing to solving mysteries that had outlived entire generations. This movement didn't replace law enforcement. It worked with law enforcement, supporting, researching, connecting clues, raising awareness, keeping cases alive. And at the center of this movement stood the tent girl, a case solved not by power but by persistence. For 30 years the tent girl lay in silence. For 30 years her story waited. For 30 years her name slept beneath a stone marked unidentified. But now, after countless dead ends, decades of searching, and the unlikely rise of a teenager armed with a second-hand computer, the case had not only found answers, it had found a legacy. A legacy that reached far beyond Georgetown, Kentucky. Far beyond the Hackman family. Far beyond Todd Matthews. Because the story of the tent girl did something almost no cold case ever does. Change the world. Before the tent girl case was solved, most police departments treated unidentified remains and missing persons as two entirely separate categories. If no one reported you missing in the correct jurisdiction, you were often never linked to the remains found somewhere else. Kentucky didn't check with Illinois. Illinois didn't check with Florida. Florida didn't check with Tennessee. No one saw the whole picture. But after Barbara was identified, law enforcement agencies across the country were forced to confront the truth. So many Jane Does weren't unidentified, they were simply unconnected. What began with a single solved case began rippling outward. Conferences changed. Training changed. Protocols changed. Forensic record-keeping changed. Communication changed. The tent girl case became part of training materials for new detectives learning about cold case procedures. It became an example of how digital tools could bridge gaps between states. It became a warning about the dangers of poor record sharing. A young mother who had vanished in the 1960s was now reshaping how America handled missing persons. With Todd's involvement, with federal support, and with pressure from advocacy groups and families, NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, was created. A free public-facing database where families, detectives, coroners, medical examiners, genealogists, investigators, volunteers, could upload and cross-reference information. It allowed users to post missing persons cases, search unidentified remains, upload dental records, compare physical characteristics, share clues, map timelines, connect across states. For the first time in American history, you didn't need a badge to help solve a missing persons case. And for the first time, authorities had a centralized system to prevent people like Barbara from slipping into the cracks of forgotten files. As of today, NamUs has resolved hundreds of cold cases. And all of it, every match, every identification, every happy ending, every closure, can be traced back to a girl found in a tent and a man who refused to forget her. After Barbara's identity was confirmed, her family made one final journey to Kentucky to update her grave. They placed a new headstone directly beneath the original one, the one that had called her the tent girl for 30 years. The new stone bore her full name, Barbara Anne Hackman. It listed her birth year. It acknowledged her nickname not as an insult but as a historical truth. It honored her as a daughter and a sister. The old stone remains above it, a reminder of the years she spent as an unknown soul, waiting for someone to speak her name again. Visitors still come to her grave. People leave flowers. People leave small trinkets. People leave folded notes. Some say thank you. Some say they're sorry. Some say they will never forget her. And in the breeze that passes through the Georgetown Cemetery, there is a kind of peace, the kind that comes only when a story finally finds its ending. Though her identity is now known, the tent girl remains a figure steeped in legend. Her story is told in documentaries, books, educational materials, true crime discussions, cold case seminars, online forums. She is used as an example of the power of persistence, the power of technology, the power of never giving up. But more importantly, she reminds us of the people who vanish without headlines, who disappear without answers, who leave behind families that never stop waiting. Her story is not about fear, it's about hope. Hope that no one remains forgotten. Hope that every name finds its way home. Hope that even decades later, truth can still rise from silence. One of the most haunting parts of the tent girl mystery is realizing how easily it could have stayed unsolved. If Todd hadn't dated Lori Riddle, if Lori hadn't told him the story, if Wilbur hadn't saved the old magazine article, if Todd hadn't bought a used computer, if he hadn't logged into that specific website, if Rosemary hadn't posted about her missing sister, if Todd hadn't been awake that night, if he had scrolled just a little faster, if he had gone to bed 5 minutes earlier, Barbara's name might still be unknown. Her case wasn't solved by fate. It was solved by persistence, by people choosing not to look away, by strangers connected across decades by a story that refused to die. And that is why her case matters. Because it proves that sometimes the smallest action, a posted message, a late-night search, a random conversation, can change the course of history. Barbara's story teaches us 5 powerful lessons. 1. Every missing person matters. No one is too forgotten to be found. 2. Technology can be a tool for justice when used with compassion. 3. Families never stop looking for those they love. 4. One person truly can make a difference if they refuse to stop caring. 5. Closure may come late, but it still comes. Her case became a blueprint for modern cold case investigation, a reminder that truth can be delayed, but it cannot be buried forever. The tent girl case began with a tragedy. It became a mystery, then a legend, then a breakthrough, then a movement. Today, it stands as one of the most important cold case identifications in American history. And as her story closes, one thing becomes clear. Barbara Anne Hackman is no longer a Jane Doe. No longer a nameless girl in a canvas tent. No longer a figure in a sketch on a gravestone. She is a person. She is remembered. She is home. And her story, the story of persistence, identity, and justice, will continue to echo through every cold case solved with the help of strangers who refuse to give up. Because the legacy of the tent girl is not about how she died. It is about how she was found. If you found this documentary compelling, if you believe every missing person deserves to be found, and if you want more deep dive true crime stories like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Buried Secret Media. Your support helps uncover forgotten stories, shine light on the silent cases, and keep memories alive. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, no secret stays buried forever.